Managing the status quo in Kashmir, tensions remain high between India and Pakistan. But could there be another all-out war between the countries? And is peace in this disputed Himalayan region even possible? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Hashim Ahalbara. Sandwiched between India and Pakistan, Kashmir has been a flashpoint between the two nuclear powers since 1947. Both New Delhi and Islamabad claim all of the region. Each now controls parts of it after 3 wars in the past 70 years. A ceasefire agreement was reached 16 years ago, but it has been regularly violated. Last week, there were fears India and Pakistan were on the brink of a new war. India carried out airstrikes in retaliation for a suicide bombing that killed at least 40 Indian troops. In Indian-administered Kashmir, Pakistan responded shooting down a fighter jet and detaining its pilot, who was then returned to India as a gesture of goodwill. But Indian and Pakistani forces have also exchanged heavy gunfire along the borders of Kashmir, killing at least 7 people. We have the latest from both sides. First, Suhail Rahman in New Delhi.
Maintaining the status quo has been a conundrum for India and Pakistan that no one seems to have an answer for. Many analysts suggest that while Kashmir seems to be the main issue between the two countries, a de facto line of control may become, and perhaps is the best possibility, of a long-term border between the two countries. But to have that conversation, Islamabad and New Delhi need to speak to each other. And as far as India is concerned, New Delhi has had a problem with Pakistan. Over the last 7 decades, the country has been ruled by one military dictatorship after another. Civilian governments have rarely lasted long enough for New Delhi to have a conversation with them. And New Delhi will not discuss issues like this with unelected military officials. The nearest that these two countries ever got to speaking to each other about trying to resolve their long-standing issues and Kashmir was in the late 90s, when President Pervez Musharraf was in charge of Pakistan. That fell through very quickly. And then also analysts suggest, how about the people of Kashmir on both sides of the line of control? Their aspirations, their wants and their needs should be considered. Will they be in the future is only a question that the politicians can ask. And then for India, the real concern is that no matter how far the negotiations go, there are always non-state actors and militant groups, or terrorists as they call them, that are sponsored, as far as New Delhi is concerned, by Pakistan. And it only takes one incident like that in Pulwama in mid-February to disrupt that status quo. It's a complicated political jigsaw that has yet no answer. For Inside Story, I'm Suhail Rahman in New Delhi.
Kamal Haida is following events from Islamabad.
Tensions between India and Pakistan remain at an all-time high. Once again, it is the issue of Kashmir which has come to the forefront. India has blamed Pakistan for committing an act of terrorism when over 40 of its soldiers were killed in Pulwama. Pakistan said that it had no evidence to suggest that the attack was carried out from Pakistan, saying that the vehicle used in that was Indian and that the attacker was a Kashmiri with Indian nationality. Pakistan continues to maintain that this is a dangerous issue and that the two sides must sit together across the table to talk about all outstanding disputes. However, India had already agreed with Pakistan under the Shimla Agreement signed after the war in 1971 that all disputes must be settled bilaterally. The problem is, India does not want a third-party intervention to try and sort out this dispute, and at the same time refuses to talk to Pakistan, bringing up the issue of terrorism. The Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan has already made an open offer to India that Pakistan is willing to discuss all outstanding issues in order to resolve this dispute. The ball, it seems now, is in India's court, according to most analysts here. And so far, the signals coming out of New Delhi shows that there is no de-escalation underway. This is Kamal Haida for Inside Story from Islamabad.
Let's bring in our panel in New Delhi. Prem Shankar Jha, journalist and author of the book Kashmir 1947, The Origins of a Dispute. In London, Victoria Schofield, a historian of the conflict. And in Lahore, via Skype, Central Asia security analyst Ahmed Rashid. Welcome to you all. Mr. Jha, judging from statements by officials from India and Pakistan, they don't seem to be willing to further escalate the crisis. So now, what is next?
You're right. I don't think there's any desire whatever to escalate the crisis anymore, because fundamentally, first of all, the attack in Pulwama was something that came out of the blue, and so all that the Indian Prime Minister did was he took full advantage of it, because he's facing an election in 6 weeks to 2 months, and beating the sort of patriotic drum helps to get votes. He's been doing that with his usual sort of flair for the last 15 days, and we've had these two attacks, counterattack. I think it served its purpose, and now I think we'll hear very soon that the poll dates will be announced.
Victoria, is it fair to say at this particular moment that this is going to be a turned chapter, and from now on it's going to be back to normal?
Well, it's always difficult to get, as you say, back to normal with the dispute over Jammu and Kashmir. What you tend to have is a halt, a period of de-escalation, a period of status quo, uneasy situation, some violence, and then potentially another flare-up. And this is why I think it's important to focus not just on de-escalation, but on what might be the next step, which inevitably has to be actually putting heads together and working out how India and peace and the inhabitants of the state can live together peacefully to resolve the issue.
Ahmed Rashid, we've seen flare-ups in the past. Is there any sentiment this time that this could be different and it could be conducive to first political talks between Imran Khan and Narendra Modi?
Well, I'm very worried. I agree with Prem that there won't be a major escalation. But what I'm worried about is that this level of escalation that we have already could be maintained for another 2 or 3 months by the Indian side, because Prime Minister Modi is seeking election, and it suits him to have Pakistan as an enemy there. It doesn't suit the Pakistanis because they are facing a very severe economic and political crisis. They want an end to this as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, I don't see Prime Minister Modi really asking for a quick resolution, or even just to go back to what was the status quo before, which was not particularly conducive towards a settlement, but at least was not putting the two countries on the edge of war.
Prem, Modi could be using this whole crisis to his own advantage, but isn't there a risk that this could further spin out of control and he would end up facing one of the biggest political crises of his tenure?
Well, that's precisely why I don't think there's going to be any more escalation from the Indian side. As far as Modi is concerned, he has got what he wanted out of it. If it goes any further now, first and foremost, we will not... You see, he was able to portray India as a victim after the Pulwama attack. But and one counterattack, okay, that's okay. We responded to what they did. But a second one now would serve no purpose whatever, particularly because the Pakistani counterattack to our airstrike was so carefully almost designed not to take human life. And in fact, there have been, as far as I know, almost no loss of human life on either side. And it served its political purpose very well. I doubt very much if he would like to rock this boat. He's a very fine orator. He's going to take full advantage of this. And what I've seen is now he's picking on the opposition and saying, why did you say this? Every time that the opposition makes a remark saying that, look, you are playing this like theater for elections, they say, but you are anti-national. So that's the game today.
Victoria, against the backdrop of the domestic politics, particularly in India, and with the upcoming elections, do you think that Modi will have to wait until after the elections to decide whether or not he will be talking to the Pakistani counterpart?
Yes, I don't see anything happening before the elections, and I think both Prem and Ahmed are right that it's going to be used as an election ploy, basically to drum that patriotic drum. It is arguable whether it might get out of control, but one hopes not, and there will not be any further escalation. But unfortunately, it's going to be some months until we see the outcome of the election before I think you'd ever get an initiative or an acceptance of a meeting between Modi and Prime Minister Imran Khan.
Mr. Rashid, this is a conflict that has been pitting two neighbors, two superpowers, India and Pakistan, for almost 70 years. But the whole issue is about Kashmir. Do you think that tomorrow, if both leaders decide to start political talks about a way out of the crisis, where should they start?
Well, we've already got a blueprint, which was in 2007 when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh from India and President Musharraf from Pakistan almost agreed on a settlement at that time. And that settlement never came into being because of a political crisis in Pakistan, and the Musharraf government unraveled. So there is already a formula there which could be taken up. I think one of the tragedies of the last few years is that Modi has refused to have a back channel in which trusted aides of Pakistan, of Pakistani leaders and Indian leaders would talk to each other. When this plan came up in 2007, it was largely due to back channels, not through the official foreign offices or the political governments of the two sides, but a very secretive back channel. When Modi was proposed to have this back channel by former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, he refused. And I think, you know, at a time like this, when tensions are so high, something like a back channel is very much needed.
Prem, we've seen commentators and analysts saying that the problem with Modi is that he has always been describing this as an issue coming from Pakistan, when he forgets the fact that this has become more of a homegrown problem where the Indian government and the BJP party in particular have been ignoring the discontent which has been simmering for quite some time in the Kashmir region.
I think you're basically right on this, and I would put it only slightly differently. This is not merely a discontent that has been simmering. The discontent had pretty nearly vanished when the road between Srinagar and Muzaffarabad was opened. I was there, I was present, I saw it on both sides of the line of control. After that, the number of militants coming across the border dropped sharply. We went ahead and we had the framework agreement that has just been referred to. And really by 2013, this thing had almost completely died out. You have to understand that the Modi government is not a normal government. It is a government that came to power with 31% of the vote. Just because the entire opposition was fighting each other, and this came as a huge surprise. Now, what they need to stay in power, they have a whole transformative agenda that India must be taken. Totally transformed from being a weak, loose, West-loving, groveling to the Muslims kind of country, to a strong Hindu country as it used to be 1,000 years ago. Now, that kind of transformative agenda, that kind of ideology that has no relationship to facts or history, they're in the middle of this, and they now feel that they're very close to it. They need to win this election for another 5 years to change every institution in the country and bring it in line with their thinking, so that there's no hint of secularism left in the police, in the bureaucracy, or in the judiciary.
But don't you see that as
that is their agenda.
Very
and
good.
This is so.
I see your point, but isn't that the very essence of the problem? And this is going to be my question to Victoria. When a party builds its agenda around Hindu nationalism, an anti-Muslim sentiment, we see in it. It's backfiring now in the Indian-administered part of Kashmir.
Well, I think it's absolutely backfiring, and this is one of the problems. And actually, one of the tragedies of the state of Jammu and Kashmir's history is that you've got a government, as Mr. Prem says, that is so antithetical to the idea of secularism. And without secularism, why should the state of Jammu and Kashmir want to stay within the Indian Union, given its past history? And I'm personally very surprised at the way that the government has handled Kashmir in these recent years, because it's really created an entire new generation of local Kashmiris. One can talk again about the involvement of Pakistan till the cows come home, but now what you've got is an indigenous movement. You look at the Kashmiris out on the streets, you look at the hostility, the use of pellet guns to quell crowds, only makes the Kashmiris feel they're being treated like cattle. This is not the way to win hearts and minds, which was the mantra chanted 20 years ago by the Indian government, and they've done the exact opposite.
Mr. Rashid, listening to Pakistani officials over the last few days, they seem to be completely in denial about their responsibility for what's happening there. They're saying that we have nothing to do with Jaish-e-Mohammed. Jaish-e-Mohammed is not claiming responsibility for the attack. Do you think that the Pakistanis ultimately will have to make major concessions for this issue in particular to move forward?
Well, let me just say one thing in addition to what Victoria said, which I agree with very much, is that it's very dangerous for India to have this kind of level of antipathy amongst the Kashmiri population. This is not an antagonism growing because of Pakistan or because of Pakistani militants coming across the border. You've suddenly got a situation in Indian Kashmir where the local militants who kill themselves, carry out suicide attacks, have become the heroes of the day. Now, this was not the case before. In fact, when Pakistan was sending in militants in the early 90s, there was a lot of resentment from Kashmiris that why are these foreigners coming and telling us what to do? Now, it seems that the Kashmiris themselves are so fed up that they're willing to lionize their own militants. I certainly, yes, I mean, as far as Pakistan is concerned, Pakistan has never faced a government in India which was not willing to talk. Every government in India has talked to Pakistan at some level or the other, and often about the Kashmir issue. This is the first government that Pakistan is faced with that refuses to talk. And consequently, there is an element of brinkmanship on Pakistan's side as well to try and force the pace of talks with India. Now, to do that, both sides have to compromise. And I think one of the ways that one compromise, obviously, is that some of these groups that are resident in Pakistan should be disbanded fully. And not just promises made, but disbanded fully. But on the other side is the need to talk, for India to talk to the Kashmiris.
Good. Speaking about the compromises, Mr. Prem, the Jammu Kashmir is a typical example of what happens when a government alienates its own population. Don't you think this is about time for the government to reach out to the Kashmiris in Jammu and Kashmir, give them bigger say in running their own affairs, for both parties to turn the chapter of decades of animosity and death?
Of course it is. Of course it is. I've written nothing else but this ever since the death of Burhan Wani. In fact, I began warning about what was happening in South Kashmir in April 2015. And I've been in touch with people in South Kashmir, and I'm appalled at the lack of sensitivity in the Modi government. The Modi government came into an agreement with Mufti Saeed and the PDP government, and then he did it from the beginning in complete bad faith. in order to make a fool out of the PDP, to destroy its control in the valley and create chaos. That's exactly what they succeeded in doing. And they had no intention right from the beginning to ever allow Kashmir to have autonomy, to ever allow the government to function. They did not want the BJP in Jammu to cooperate with the PDP in Kashmir, and they did not want to talk to the Hurriyat. They deliberately broke all contact and communication with the Hurriyat in the most insulting manner possible, with the intention of degrading them, denigrating them in Kashmir, so that you get a vacuum there. That the vacuum is now being filled by these extreme militants, these young and extreme militants. And I agree with you that this is not in the control of either Pakistan or India. There could be another suicide attack any day in Kashmir, and Mr. Modi would say it's come from Pakistan, and in order to get votes, and then there'd be another row here, and then another confrontation. I'm terrified of that. Is that there are three parties to the dispute now, not two.
Victoria, 2018 was described as one of the worst years there in Jammu Kashmir. Unprecedented level of violence, 500 people killed. The international community is calling for India to further investigate human rights abuses. Where does it leave the region?
Well, can I also add that putting Jammu and Kashmir under governor's rule, what message does that send to the inhabitants? I think that has to be taken into account. And as Mr. Prem says, this idea of cooperation and allowing the PDP to function just never happened. I think where it leaves us is that you have to have, as I say, some leadership which has the vision to see that this actually can endanger not just the inhabitants, but the whole region, maybe the whole world, if there were ever to be a nuclear exchange. If there has to be one more attack, how can, we've now seeing a de-escalation, but after the next attack, will there be that same de-escalation, or will the two countries resort to war? And that's the sort of scenario we've been looking at really for the last 30 years. We go back to the Kargil War in 1999, the attack on the Delhi Parliament in 2001, the Mumbai attack in 2008. These are all landmark occasions when, thank goodness, both countries withdrew from the brink. But who knows what will happen next time?
Ahmed Rashid, you spent many years writing about geopolitical implications of conflicts. Kashmir is a conflict that started 70 years ago because of a hasty partition, historical background, different ethnic and religious backgrounds. The two countries still determined that they have the absolute right to control all of Kashmir. There are nuclear powers, and any further confrontation in the near future could just mean further destruction. What could be the best possible scenario for India and Pakistan to end this conflict?
Well, the Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan has offered talks and talks about terrorism. And that is precisely what Modi had asked for back in 2014 when he first addressed the UN General Assembly. He said that, he cancelled talks with Pakistan and said, the only talks with Pakistan will be about terrorism. Now, if the two sides if Pakistan is prepared to discuss terrorism, as Imran Khan has said, I think this is, one plank towards building up a consensus for a dialogue. If, as you say, there is no dialogue and talks do not take place, I fear very much that the whole region is going to be affected. The fact is that this split between India and Pakistan is now very much dividing the region. Of course, all the regional countries have said we don't want war, but they're lining up on one side or the other. And the really big fear is how will this affect relations with China, with Russia, with the United States, and with the Arab countries.
Thank you.
As these tensions worsen, I don't think we will see any quick resolution.
Thank you very much indeed, Ahmed Rashid, Prem Shankar Jha and Victoria Schofield. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution to the program. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hashim Ahalbara, and the whole team here. Bye for now.